Michelle, and welcome back to the Royal Daily Tea. Hope everyone has had a fabulous week. I took a few days off to review Prince Harry's book, Spare. Now, I did listen to the audiobook version over a period of 3.5 days. It was an extremely long book, almost 500 pages, and I did listen to it while I was working. I made a lot of notes, but I'm going to give you a very cliff version synopsis of the book, just basically an overall overview of my opinion of Prince Harry after reading his book, The Spare. I'm not going to go through every single thing he's talked about. A lot of it has been through the leaks that were through The Guardian, but I will touch on some of the topics and maybe some topics that you're not aware of. But we have a lot to get into today, so you know what to do. Sit back and relax, grab yourself a beverage, and let's get into the Royal Daily Tea. Now, what I'm going to say in the beginning is I am not a trained professional. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a therapist. This is simply my opinion, and please make sure you check out my disclaimer down below in the description. So Harry, in my opinion, is a very sad and broken person, and I don't mean that as a slight. I really, truly believe he is a very sad and broken person who never recovered from the death of his mother that happened at the age of 12. In my opinion, Prince Harry is emotionally stinted at the age of a 12-year-old boy. He has not grown emotionally or mentally past the age of 12. He doesn't know how to handle stress or criticism. He admits that he doesn't have a lot of memories of his childhood or his mother, that he put up an emotional wall after his mother died, and that he only truly cried for his mother one time, and that was at the actual burial ground of his mother. And since then, he has suppressed all feelings of his mother. They never talked about his mother, the death, the funeral. He just kind of buried it inside of himself and put up an emotional and mental block when it came to his mother. Now, there was one section of the book that did kind of make me tear up a little bit because it reminds me of my mom. Some of you know that my mom was an orphan. Her mother died after she was born, and her father was missing in action in the war, and they never recovered his body, so he was what you call missing in action. So when my mom was being raised, it was not a great environment. It was a borderline abusive environment. She used to fantasize that her father would come and rescue her, and that is how she coped with her situation all throughout her childhood. So Harry talks about he didn't believe his mother had died. It was hard for him to grasp as a 12-year-old boy that his mother was gone. He simply fantasized that his mother escaped and that she started a brand new life on her own, and that she would one day come back and get him and Prince William. And that was really, really heartbreaking. It was really sad. And it did make me tear up because, again, it reminded me of a story that my mom used to tell me as when she used to do as a child to kind of cope and self-soothe herself through her horrific childhood. And so Harry kind of shared that very same sentiment, where he also, in his fantasy world, he used to literally dream of walking down a street, seeing a woman who looked exactly like his mom, but she was wearing like a scarf and sunglasses, and he would rush up to her and say, "Mummy, Mummy," and he would go to tap her on the shoulder, and just as she would turn around, he would wake up. Now, I did find that extremely heartbreaking. He also tells the story, of course, how his father wasn't really available. His dad was very busy. His dad always acted like he was never prepared for fatherhood. Now, it's weird because Harry does a lot of this. He gives people a compliment and then he puts them down and then gives them a compliment. It's kind of like a hug punch, hug punch, hug punch. So it's kind of weird how he always feels the need to do that. He never just comes out and says overtly nice things about people. He'll put them down and say something horrific, and then he'll say, well, on the other hand, Pa did this and he was great at that, but then he'll put them down again. So it's a very weird dynamic of always putting people down. Now, of course, Prince Harry paints himself and Meghan Markle to be two perfect, innocent people who've never done anything wrong. never put a foot wrong. They're just perfect. Now, in some of the excerpts that have come out, Prince Harry talked about how his brother William was his beloved brother, but also his arch nemesis, which is again very strange to use that word arch nemesis. Like, who uses that word in 2023? That's like from the 1800s. But also, I don't believe that Prince William for one moment was his arch nemesis. Prince William was his big brother, a typical big brother. And apparently, it transcends whether you're royal or not royal. Siblings act a certain way toward each other because you grow up in childhood together. You have that very unique experience of growing up together. And it's not all rainbows and unicorns. I mean, sometimes your siblings can be assholes. That's part of life. And I don't think that William was a bad brother from even the stories that he says. To me, he was exercising big brotherly love, tough love. There was a period of time when they went to Eton together, and Harry was like, well, William didn't want to hang around me. Well, that's normal. Most older siblings don't want to hang around their younger siblings, especially when they're in a social environment, when they're in school with their friends. They act like, I don't care if we're related. I'm going to act like I don't know you. Don't talk to me. That's kind of a normal thing that siblings do. And Harry literally acted like this was the worst thing on earth. Another thing I noticed about Harry is he's very thin skinned, very overly sensitive. And for a person who has grown up in that gilded cage in the public eye his entire life, literally since he was a day old, it's weird how all of these little things really bother him. So, the other thing I'm going to say about Harry is I believe, in my personal opinion, he suffered from PTSD from the traumatic situation of losing his mother the way he did so abruptly and so publicly. The fact he never truly mourned her, he buried and suppressed his emotions, and everyone around him never talked about it. So it was kind of like he had no outlet. So he put up this emotional barrier. I believe he suffered some PTSD from constantly being in the press, constantly being in the public. If you remember, pre Diana's death, they were relentless. The paparazzi really was terrible for the children. So I believe he has a lot of PTSD from being around his mom, being hounded. Then he had that traumatic death of his mother. And I also believe he suffers from abandonment issues. And I think this really does play into his relationship with Meghan Markle. In my opinion, he was abandoned by his mother when she died when he was only 12. Then he also writes in the book that he didn't want his father to marry Camilla because he was afraid she would turn into the evil stepmother and that she had an agenda and was gunning to be his wife and the queen. Since Charles was married to Diana, that she was leaking stories to the press, he didn't trust her. But then on the other hand, he was happy she made Pa happy. So he would do again the punch, hug, punch, hug. He also talked about how he was afraid that after his dad finally married Camilla, that he would have less time with Pa. So throughout the book, they have some really cute family nicknames that are quite frankly very endearing. He refers to King Charles as Pa, calls him Pa. They refer to William as Willie, and they call Harry Harold. And another cute thing we learned is that King Charles refers to Harry as my darling boy. That is such a sweet sentiment to have your father call you my darling boy. That just really is heartwarming to me, and it shows there really was a lot of love, and there is a lot of love between father and son. Even though Harry's being very difficult, you can tell Charles loves his kids. There's a lot of love there, and this is why I think this whole thing is extremely painful, because it really hurts when someone you love hurts you. Purposely betrays you. It's hurtful. If it was somebody you didn't care about, it would have no effect. But when it comes from your son that you call my darling boy, that's gotta hurt. So in the book, he talks about how the relationship between him and his father, Pa, and his brother, William. That's mainly 90% of it is how he feels he fits within the family. He's the spare, he's the plan B, he's second best. That, you love Willie more, kind of the Smothers Brothers, mom loves you more type of thing. He kind of grew up in an environment as the spare, being told he was the spare, always feeling second best, even though they overindulged him and he lived a very privileged and spoiled life. He still, in his mind, wasn't up to the standard of William. Now, he always talks about how William was very competitive and jealous of him, but I really think he was the one who was jealous and competitive with William, because William was the older brother, he was the heir. So William had a little bit different of a childhood. He had more responsibility and pressure because he was being trained to be a king, not like Harry. So Harry kind of brings up a lot of really petty things. Everything that he brings up is really petty. It's kind of a tit for tat. And he compares himself to his brother a lot, which I know is a normal thing, but in this circumstance, with this family, with this hierarchy, you cannot compare the heir and the spare because they're on two different paths. One is the future king, and one is basically the backup. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's true. He even likened himself to spare parts, like he's the organ donor for, like, if William needs a kidney or a liver or whatever, they're just going to take a body part from Harry. And that's not true. So he likened himself to spare parts, kind of being bred just in case something happens. He's the plan B, and that nobody cared about the spare, that his father and his brother couldn't travel together because heaven forbid if they both went down in the airplane, but no one cared about the spare. He was just free to do, whatever. It wasn't like they were telling him to go play with matches or go run in the road. They did care about him, but to him and his childhood view, this is how he felt. Now, I will say this entire book, I felt like I was reading the musings of a 12-year-old boy who got, sent off to summer camp, and he was writing a letter to Daddy to let him know how he felt. I'm going to give you a piece of my mind and tell you what I think about you. This is literally the musings of a 12-year-old Harry, because again, he has not grown past the emotional state of a 12-year-old boy. I also liken this to Harry is literally the Jan Brady of the royal family. And this whole book, it's Marcia, 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 Willie, Willie, Willie. He's basically complaining and comparing himself constantly to his brother. So he says that William's the arch nemesis, that William always wants to compete with him, and he's jealous if Harry ever succeeds or does anything. William is jealous. Well, I would say they were both competitive with each other, and maybe there's jealousy, again, sibling rivalry, but I think it was more on Harry's side toward William than William to Harry. Again, he was the Jan Brady of the royal family, Marcia, 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 because the pettiness of the stuff he talks about, it's like a 12-year-old boy. Now, the other thing, he says the arch nemesis is his brother, but in reality, I believe it's the press. His arch nemesis is really the press. He has a very unhealthy, unhinged hatred of the press. Now, I think that comes from his childhood, where he saw them hound his mother and how his mother would cry. And he, every time they turned around, there was the clicks. So I think there's some kind of deep-rooted paranoia along with the PTSD and what he saw them do to his mother, and then ultimately started to do to him as he grew up. So he really hates the press. It's almost unhealthy. And again, he's very thin-skinned. And this is why him and Meghan are seriously a perfect couple. So the other interesting thing is that Harry, he grows up a very privileged prince, a royal. He talks about his time going to school. He talks about the military, but he also talks about how he just wants to be a real boy. He's almost like Pinocchio. I just want to be a real boy, daddy. And he wants to get rid of the confines of being a royal and just be able to live a very anonymous life like a normal person. And I totally can understand where he's coming from because his entire life is always going to be on display. He talks about how he doesn't have trust for people. He always had to have secret security around, and he felt like he always had to have a buffer around him because people always had ulterior motives. So not only did he hate the press, but he was also very suspicious and paranoid of every single person around him, of leaking stories, of selling him out. And there's a very interesting story. So every time a negative story was put in the press as Harry as a teenager or a young person in his 20s, he was like, oh my God, the press. I can't believe the press. They're evil. We have to shut this down. And he has a nickname for two paparazzi, Tweedledum and Tweedledummer, who follow him around, I guess, most of his adulthood. Well, an interesting thing about Harry is even though he wants to be a real boy, he really does love those royal perks when it's convenient. But he also has a get out of jail card for everything. He is literally a victim and a blameless person. Nothing is ever his fault. It's the press's fault for writing a story about something that I actually did. But it's not my fault. It's the press's fault. Or it's the palace's fault. Someone's leaking stories and they're sacrificing me. Someone sold me out. It's not my fault. Or it's someone in my family's fault, but it's never Harry's fault. He's got a get out of jail card for everything. But he blames everything that's negative in his life on the press when it's convenient. So one story is when he was around 17 years of age. I believe he was attending Eton. He gets called to the principal's office and he's thinking, oh no, I'm getting busted because apparently he had just lost his virginity to an older woman out in a field behind a pub. But no, that was not the incident. Instead, I believe it was his father's press secretary questioned him that the press had got a story that he was doing illegal substances. And they asked him, is it true? Are you doing illegal substances? And Harry said, no, I'm not doing that. You got to shut it down immediately. Immediately put out that story and tell him it's not true. Now, the story also said that Harry was a major drug addict and he was going to rehab. But apparently, the palace did not put out a story to defend Harry, and Harry was livid. Livid. He was like, oh, I see how it is. You're not going to protect me. You're going to hang me out to dry. You're sacrificing me on Camilla's PR altar. Now, at the time, I believe this is around the time that Charles and Camilla got married. Charles was still having a lot of bad press, and he thought Charles and Camilla were very desperate for him to get some positive press. And so therefore it would look really sympathetic for Charles to be the poor single dad taking care of his drug addict son instead of being the cheating husband, and public enemy number one, because right after Diana's death, everyone was like, glaring at Charles. Right after he says that, he admits, well, I was doing drugs. I lied. I lied to the press secretary, but still, they should have lied and covered for me. It's like, wait a minute, you're mad at the press because they actually covered a true story about you doing stuff you shouldn't have been doing, and you're mad at the palace for not lying and covering for you. So I think the press secretary probably knew for a fact Harry was lying, that Harry was doing what the paper was going to say he was doing. Now, granted, they exaggerated, made him an addict, said he was going to rehab. But the point is, at least 50 to 60% of most of the press stories have some truth to it. And Harry talks about how he was the spare and he was labeled the dumb one and the naughty one. And he flunked all of his classes, not because he was dumb, but because, the tragedy that happened with his mom or the press or whatever. They accused him of cheating on an art project. He's like, who cheats on an art project? And it came out that no, he didn't cheat. But again, he was labeled the thick one, the dumb one, the spare one, the naughty one. Then he talks about the infamous Halloween costume and how it wasn't his fault and how William and Kate suggested it. And he's so mad that it's in the papers. Now, this time the palace did step in and try to save his reputation by putting out a story that he went and visited some Holocaust survivors as well as a rabbi. So they really did try to clean up his image. And then he talks about his time in the military, which was a very long segment. I have to be honest with you guys, it was boring. I don't care about war stuff. The good stuff basically came toward the end when he starts talking about his relationship with Meghan. Now, throughout the book, he talks about Camilla and his father. He does have some very sweet parts about his father, how when he was a young boy, Harry was very afraid of the dark, and his father would actually come in his room and sit on his bed until he fell asleep, and then he would, sneak out at the end of the night. And how when Harry was at Eton, his father would ask him, please write me letters, because he wanted to keep his letters. So the fact that Paul used to call him my darling boy and would tell him, just ignore the press, just get over it. I'm proud of you. You can do it. Charles seemed like he was a very loving and caring and encouraging father who also had a lot of stress, a lot of work put upon him, and he never got a break in the press. Charles has been vilified for as long as I can remember. Just recently, in the past couple of years, they started to give him a little bit of good press. But for the longest time, Charles was never portrayed fairly. Diana always got the good press, and poor Charles was always vilified. But you know what? He just kept on going, and he has, a lot to show for his work with the Prince's Trust Foundation. And Charles said to Harry, quit focusing on the negative stories of the press, just ignore it and keep going. But Harry cannot handle criticism at all. He is so hypersensitive. It's bizarre. Again, he grew up his entire life in that gilded cage where Daddy is holding the purse strings like Pinocchio and he wants to be a real boy, but he cannot stand for anything negative to be put upon him. Yet he has many people in the royal family who serve as excellent examples of how to be royal. He's got his, aunt, Princess Anne. He has Prince Edward. He has the Queen. He has his grandfather, even his father. And he even says in the book, that's one thing he admired about his dad was that his dad would stay up late, fall asleep at his desk. He would just keep going, and that he finally deserved to be happy and married the woman that he loved. But then he turns it around and makes it like Charles and Camilla. They're jealous of William and Catherine. They're jealous of, Harry and Meghan, and they're going to sell out their children so they could get positive press. Now, a person who refers to his son as my darling boy, I just don't see him selling out his children so he can get positive press. He made it seem like Charles was addicted to the good press and he would ante up any negative story about Harry or William or Catherine if he would look good in the press. I really doubt that, because this man has had decades of negative press. Now, he does kind of go into the relationship a little bit, of the courtship of William and Catherine, and how he loves Catherine. She was the sister he never had. But then he talks about, after his father married Camilla, he was afraid he was going to lose his father to Camilla. And then he talks about the breakdown of his relationship with William, and that William was going off to start his own family with Catherine. And he was, sad. He felt left behind and abandoned once again. So now he doesn't have his mom. His father has gone off and married Camilla. He doesn't have those sweet moments with Pa. And now his big brother, Willie, is now with Kate, and they're having children and they have their own life. And he's kind of left alone, not having much of a purpose. His military career isn't going the way he wants. And then he talks about his relationships a little bit with Cressida and Chelsea, and how they were lovely girls, but they didn't fit quite into the royal role, and they didn't want to change themselves. They were free spirits, and how he knew that they weren't going to work long term. And then he enters into the perfection and the fairy tale that is Meghan Markle. Now, we all know that the meet cute story has changed a lot. And here he talks about how he's on his friend, I believe her name was Violet, her Instagram account, and he sees Meghan, and literally the conveyor belt stops. She was so breathtaking. She was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, and she's literally having a puppy dog filter on her face. So they talk about their meet cute and how they meet. They meet up at Soho House. But one thing I got to tell y'all is Meghan Markle, the girl has got game. She really does. She could teach a class. She's very smart in how she snared Harry. And the reason why, well, there's several reasons, is one, you have Harry who's, emotionally stinted as a 14-year-old broken boy with abandonment issues, with mommy issues, with PTSD, who's lonely, who's desperate to get married, who feels like he's all by himself. He also says that they started calling him Bridget Jones because he was around 32 years of age. People kept teasing him, when are you going to get married? When are you going to get married? And he wanted to have a family. He was desperate. They were calling him names, and then in comes Meghan. So Meghan definitely got him at the right time. I think if he would have met Meghan 3 or 4 years earlier, it wouldn't have worked out. But at that point, he was lonely. He was desperate. He was just out of the military. He was living at not caught, kind of the bachelor lifestyle. And here comes a woman who literally solves his mommy issues, his abandonment issues, his lonely issues, someone who's going to give him a purpose and a family all rolled into one. Meghan literally lobster clawed herself like a suction cup onto Harry, and he wears Meghan like a security blanket. That's right. She is not letting go, and he needs a blanket. So it's kind of like kismet, a man who has abandonment issues and mommy issues, and here's a woman who's embodying the essence of his mummy, and she suction cupped herself with the lobster claw right onto his arm. So he's got a weighted security blanket for life. Talk about a win-win situation. So now they kind of fast forward into the whole dating process, but there's one thing, like I said, Meghan is kind of a genius. You got to hand it to the girl. She has game. Now, I've talked about how Meghan Markle had hoodwinked Prince Harry in a previous video. You can go and watch it, but she had pretty much befriended quite a few people in Prince Harry's outer circle. She was even I would say an acquaintance of Princess Eugenie, not really a friend, more of an acquaintance. But Princess Eugenie had introduced Harry to Cressida. So, Meghan was getting herself all sorts of friends that would eventually lead to Prince Harry. Now, the weird thing about Prince Harry, he was easily fooled. For a man who's so paranoid about people having ulterior motives, about people planning stories, about the press, he took everything that Meghan said hook, line, and sinker. She said she didn't know much about the royals. She never Googled him. She just wanted to hear from him. She didn't know about his mom, the past, nothing. And we all know by now that that's just malarkey. The woman had literally studied his mother down to the perfume, her clothes, her mannerisms. And when he met her at the very first time, they met at a restaurant. I believe it was Soho. I could be wrong. He said he was so intimidated by her because she wasn't just an actress. She was a philanthropist, a humanitarian. She wanted to fight for women's rights. I mean, everything about her. She talked about her trip to, I think, Africa or India. And he was thinking to himself, perfect. She's perfect. Because again, Meghan Markle wanted to create that resume that would check all of the boxes to entice a man like Prince Harry. And there's nothing wrong with that, ladies, by the way. You find out the kind of person you want into your life. What are the qualities that you need to have? And you do it. It's textbook. She was only in town for a couple of days, and then she had to go back to Canada to film Suits. And then over the summer, she had a couple of trips planned because she was doing the Eat, Love, Pray that was very popular at the time, I believe, when that book came out. So she was going to Spain and Italy, and her summer was just booked. But her friend said to leave 1 week open for magic. Now, I got to be honest with y'all, I do like that idea. I'm not going to lie. I think that's amazing. Everyone needs to have their life open for magic. So, Meghan was doing the Eat, Love, Pray, and she had 1 week left for magic. And Harry was in the restaurant. He had plans to go to Africa, and he had a lot of things on his schedule. And he's like, well, I wonder if my open week is the same as Meghan's. And wouldn't you know it, it was. Now, I believe Megan was lying. Um, Maybe that was the exact same week, maybe it wasn't. But let's be honest, the girl would have moved some dates to make it happen. And that's how Harry and Meghan got that little romantic vacation to Botswana, where they got to spend a lot of time together. Now, the other interesting thing, and of course, it was hats off to Meghan Markle, she got the man addicted to her because she created scarcity and excitement because they didn't get to be around each other but every couple of weeks because it was long distance. So every 2 weeks, Megan would get on the plane and fly out there and go into the grocery store and hanging out. Cooking a roast chicken at Not Caught was exciting, or going to Waitrose was exciting because, again, if you're not around someone, doing just the most mundane things is exciting. It's romantic. And so for Harry and Meghan, it was a little secret and scarcity, and it was fun and it was exciting, and they had to sneak around. So this is going to heighten that relationship and make it seem magical. And Meghan was constantly bringing in the Diana references, and Harry was a sponge. He was literally drinking it in. The mummy issues, the abandonment issues are now falling away because he has Meghan. They also had a very strong physical connection, but they also had a very strong mental and emotional connection. And then they had the added excitement of scarcity. So you add all those things in, and it's like within 9 months, he was asking her to marry him. Now, he tells the story, of course, how William and Catherine met, and he makes up the story of how they were fans of Suits, which it didn't seem like they were fans of Suits because they definitely were not impressed with her, because when she went to go meet William and Catherine for the first time, she went in for a hug. She didn't do the curtsy. She was dressed down in jeans. Like, if they were so enamored with her as a movie star, would they care about that? They would be like, oh my God, I'm meeting someone I watch on TV. So it didn't seem like William and Catherine really had that vibe, that they were super excited to meet her. So I think that was a very big exaggeration. Now, the disturbing thing that I find to be a trend throughout this book is Harry details his illegal drug use, his marijuana, his other uses, and his hallucinogen psychedelic mushrooms, which can mess with your mind. They can also kind of produce false memories, which is very damaging and dangerous. Now, in this book, there's a lot of inconsistencies that I'm not even going to go into in this video because I'll be here forever. But I think he has a very distorted view of some facts and memories that have definitely changed a lot of things that have happened. Again, people have debunked it. So he kind of goes into the whole thing between William and Catherine and his, Charles and Camilla, and that the overall thing he tries to establish is that everyone was just so enamored by this beautiful actress, but they were all intimidated and jealous of Meghan's star power. And that Camilla and Charles were not happy that here was another person who was going to outshine them. And that on several occasions, they had berated Catherine and William for stealing their thunder. Now, I don't believe that for one moment. Again, there's not that many royals. And of course, a good-looking young couple is definitely going to go to the top of the pile. I don't believe for one moment they're competing with one another. They all have their own important roles. But again, Harry has this weird fascination with competition and being jealous. Again, he's paranoid and he thinks everyone's jealous of him. He's a legend in his own mind. Now, Meghan, when she comes into the mix, we've already talked about how she came with her own graveyard of drama and people she had ghosted from her past. Now, it was interesting how he doesn't really get into the Jubilee. He doesn't really get into Thomas Markle that much. He kind of glides over a lot of the drama that happened, but some of the things he shared was a little alarming. Now, he did say that he didn't ask Thomas for permission, but he did have to go to the Queen to ask permission to get engaged to Meghan, and how he asked the Queen during a hunt. I believe it was at Sandringham, and it was awkward. He's holding two dead pheasants in his hand, and the Queen kind of gave him a weird answer. He asked her, I was told I have to ask your permission because the first 6 to the throne have to ask permission. And she said to him, well, I guess I have to say yes. And he took that as, well, did she really mean that? Is she effing with me? Is she sarcastic? Does she feel she has to? It's like she said she was teasing you. She gave you, well, I guess I have to say yes. She gave him an approval. So again, he's very sensitive and thin skinned. He takes things kind of the wrong way. Now, throughout the book, he talks about his relationship and how he loves his brother, how his brother was the heir, would kind of pull his weight around and say, well, I'm the heir and I command you, or some stupid stuff about wearing the beard, that type of thing. But then when it came to Meghan, Harry talks about how William was very concerned about Meghan and how she was, a divorcee. She was an American. They didn't really know each other. He wanted them to slow it down. But Harry wasn't listening. So again, he goes and he gets the permission from the Queen. They get engaged. He gets, the ring together. They have the whole tiara gate situation. And then, of course, he talks about the infamous dog bowl situation where they get into a fight. Well, William confronts Harry about the behavior and the rumors that are happening about Meghan bullying the staff. Now, he says he promised Willie, after Willie came back and apologized to him, that he wouldn't tell Meghan, that William said, and Meghan doesn't need to know what happened. So that's why he called the therapist and not Meghan, because he was being a good bro and keeping a promise to big bro Willie. And he called his therapist to handle the attack of the dog bowl. Again, he cannot handle anything, apparently. But then the main situation is when they finally decided that they've had enough, that his family wasn't defending Meghan Markle. They weren't standing up for her, and the silence is betrayal. So the biggest takeaway, or the biggest mistreatment that I can even see, is the fact that the royal family wouldn't stand up together and defend Meghan to the press. Harry didn't care about himself, it was Meghan. And the whole royal family would say to him, just ignore it. This is what happens. We have to deal with it. We have to have a relationship with the staff. It's just, let it go. Just keep doing your work. But of course, Harry and Meghan are two conceited narcissists who have very thin skin, couldn't let it go. And Meghan, being an outsider, is new. So I can understand people writing some horrific things about you, how that could be hard to swallow. But at the same time, Harry never prepared her, it seems, for a lot of the royal roles. So Harry and Meghan, their biggest grievances was that the royal family in the palace would not dispel stories about Meghan. That was literally it. As a spare, he was actually given special treatment. He was given his own office, Sussex Royal. He was given his own patronages. He was kind of elevated a little bit behind a station. He actually had joined his father on the Prince's Trust Foundation. He did a lot of things that most of the spares would not have done. Again, they kind of overcompensated and spoiled Harry, but it wasn't good enough. No one could say anything negative about me. Again, all the way back to the time at Eton when he wanted them to bury a story, that was true. And here comes Meghan, can't handle anything negative. So that is the major takeaway. Why they left was because the royal family wouldn't squash negative stories, not this mistreatment. And then, of course, he accused members of the royal family of planting stories against him and Meghan because they're jealous. Literally, in a nutshell, this is the entire book. The press is evil. I'm not responsible for anything. Everyone is jealous. Even my family. They're plotting against us. Me and Meghan against the world. We're innocent. The end. Literally, that's it. A professional, princely pity party. So then he talks about Megxit at the very end when him and Meghan decide, we're done. They're in Canada. She's there with Archie. He goes for that Sandringham summit where supposedly there were 5 options on the table, but I only hear of 3. 1 is to keep status quo, 2 is to be half in, half out, and 3 is to be all the way out. So he tells a really weird story how one of the Queen's courtiers was there. So when he went to the Sandringham summit, it was the Queen, Charles, William, and one of the Queen's aides, who he calls, I think, the Bee. He called them the Bee and the Wasp. Some of these people had some interesting names. So the bee was there, who was one of the queen's aide, and they had all these paperwork, all these official drafts on the table, and they were discussing the options and how William was screaming at him and blowing up at him. And basically, he was trying to say, look, we'll step back, we'll not take a paycheck, we'll go to Canada, but just give us our security. Like, security was a major deal for Harry because he's used to having the 3 bodyguards, surrounding him, to be there at his beck and call, to cover for him, whatever, his entire life. And of course, Meghan feels like she needs to have the security as well because, who's going to get her Starbucks? And so they're sitting there talking, and finally he realizes no one's looking at him. No one's paying attention. And then the bee, who's a code name for the aide, says, well, here's draft number 3. And he pushes the paper out. And this is the one where him and Meghan are out. And he's like, well, where's the printout for all of the other drafts? And the guy's like, oh, our printer's on the fritz. Like, the aide lies about a printer. So Harry, I guess leaves the room. And he goes down the corridor to where the bee's offices are. And while he goes into the office, he hears the printer going. And he goes in there and sees the assistant to the bee. And he's like, does the printer work? And the bee's assistant's like, yes, sir, the printer works just fine. And just then the bee walks in and he's embarrassed because he's been busted for lying. So he's trying to insinuate that the royal family, Charles, the Queen, and William, had made that decision for him. There was going to be no discussion. They decided that him and Meghan needed to leave, do that 12-month review, and then after the 12 months, they can possibly come back into the royal fold. But of course, they broke all the rules and they couldn't. So according to Harry, there was no discussion. There was no debate. They had made the decision for him, and they had already printed out the draft that was going to be presented to the press. So he was really hurt and upset about that, felt he was kicked out and bullied of the royal family. So when he says he was kicked out, that's what he's referring to, saying they made that decision for him. So then, of course, they come back to the States and everything is kumbaya and they're super happy and thrilled. He doesn't really go into a lot of things. He kind of glances over it. He doesn't even mention the Jubilee. He glances over the Oprah Winfrey interview. He glanced over Meghan's father situation. The only thing he talks about is the very beginning of the book when he is waiting at the crypt of Wallace Simpson. And this is right after his grandfather's funeral. He's there to have a meeting with William and his father. And of course, it doesn't go well. This is right after the Oprah Winfrey interview. So you can imagine they were a little pissed at Harry. And so when he's there, they were like, they're still confused. Why did you leave? Why did you want to leave? And he's like, I can't believe you don't understand. So really, the only reason why Harry and Meghan left was because of the press, because they weren't getting squashed. And he thought that they were selling stories. And still, Charles and William are befuddled. They're like, that's it? Like, stuff we deal with every single day, you couldn't handle, and that's why you had to leave. So at one point, it gets very tense between William and Harry, and William kind of grabs him by the collar, and he's like, on Mummy's life, Harold, I love you, and I want you to be happy. And apparently, on Mummy's life was a code word or a code sentence that the boys would say when they were serious. It's like a vow, very serious. And he says, even Charles stopped when William said, on Mummy's life, Harold, I love you. I want you to be happy. And see, to me, this sounds like a big brother who's been hurt, who's trying to toughen up his little bro and say, get it together. Get it together, Harold. I'm here for you. I love you. I don't like you. I don't understand you, but I just want you to be happy. And Harry didn't believe him. He said, I don't believe you, which is heartbreaking. So this was right after, the Oprah Winfrey interview where Harry and Meghan slammed the royal family and accused them of being racist. Now, there's been stories that have come out where Harry is now backtracking, saying he didn't say what he said, and he does the whole silence is betrayal. Well, silence is betrayal, Harry. And you and your wife have sat there for almost 2 years. You sat there for 22 months after you made racist allegations against a member of the royal family. And now you're backtracking, saying it was the press who said it. I didn't say it. Well, you didn't correct it for 22 months. So your silence is betrayal. You're a hypocrite, you're a baby, and you're a bully. So the only thing I got out of this whole book is the sadness of Prince Harry, the sadness of the breakdown of a strong bond between two brothers, a woman who came in right for the picking, the fact that Harry likes to do microdosing of psychedelic drugs that can warp your mind and create false memories and is very dangerous to mess with. He has a lot of stories about his drug use, but I can't even get into in this video. Now, another thing I will say is I know that he's going to a lot of therapy, one that was suggested by Megan. It's a little alarming, but in his mind, he's a superhero. He is the super spare, and it's his mission to save the monarchy. That's right, he's there to save them in his mind while he's taking mushrooms. So this whole story is told from his viewpoint, which was that of a 12-year-old boy. It's very sad. It's a pity party. And quite frankly, all of the juicy bits have been in my videos and The Guardian where they leaked the story. It's not worth reading, but yeah, that's my take. I also feel there could be a second book. Now there was an article that just came out today about him possibly doing another book because again, he skipped over a lot of stuff. And I think Megan is going to come out with her own book, and that's going to be even juicier. But let me know what you guys think about my review, about The Spare. Do you plan to read it? Do you think Harry's going to have a second book? Leave me your comments, guys, down below. As always, I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye, guys.